Hey there, Chamber World. Jay Revel here. Welcome to another edition of the Greater Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce podcast. We are delighted to have you listening to us today. We have got a great guest, my friend, and hopefully yours, the publisher of the Tallahassee Democrat, Skip Foster. As always, I've got my wonderful friend, Sarah Solomon, here, and co-worker and producer of this fabulous podcast with us today. Sarah, how's everything going?
It's a great day for a podcast. I'm looking forward to this one.
Absolutely. I think we're going to have a really fun episode here for you folks, and we're going to talk about a range of things affecting our community, a little bit about the newspaper business and some other exciting things that you might not know about Skip. But I've had the opportunity to know Skip for a few years now, and one of the roles in which he plays in the community that's important to us here at the Chambers. He serves on our board of directors here at the Chamber of Commerce. Skip, welcome. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for all you're doing for our great community.
Happy to be here. What's a bad day for a podcast? If this is a good day, it's a bad day.
Every day is a good day
Every
for
day
a
is a
podcast
good day
at
for
the
a
Chamber
podcast.
of Commerce.
Right.
Right. It's always Chamber of Commerce weather. It just sometimes, is more bright than others.
Exactly.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you being with us, Skip. A lot going on in the community these days. The Tallahassee Democrat has been an integral part of our community for well over a century, and we're just thrilled to be able to kind of pick your brain a little bit on what it's like to run the newspaper of record for Florida's capital city. So let's kind of jump right in. How is it that one becomes the publisher of the Tallahassee Democrat? Paint us a little picture of your career arc there.
Well, when I first got to town and was given the privilege of running the paper, the late, great Gerald Inslee interviewed me for the kind of here's the new dude story, right? And he told me that I was the 10th publisher of the paper, and that was if I wasn't intimidated coming in, I was fully intimidated when I got that news, not to mention talking to somebody like Gerald, who was so smart and knew so much about the history of the paper and of the city. So I got here a little differently than most. It's the normal path is from either the finance or the advertising side, and I came from the news side. I was actually a sports reporter way back when, 1988 in Hickory, North Carolina was my first job, and then spent most of my time in Gastonia and then Shelby. And I kind of figured out pretty fast that even when I got to cover things like Charlotte Hornets games and ACC basketball, that relying on either soon-to-be or already millionaire 20-year-olds to say something interesting at 10:45 at night and then having to turn that around in an hour and make it a story might not be how I wanted to spend the rest of my career. It's for some people, but not for me. And so moved over to the kind of editing, some of the design, did some design work, then the editing side, and then eventually moved over to the business side, and really enjoy that. And it lets me really kind of, I had to learn a lot about the production side of the business, but have really enjoyed the role.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I'm always fascinated with how people's careers develop and how they come to their positions. And with you, it's fascinating because the time in which your career has developed has coincided with the time in which the newspaper industry and the media industry landscape has just shifted and changed quite a bit in the last couple of decades. Tell us a little bit about just how that landscape looks today and what those changes have been like.
Well, at its core, our business is still what it has always been, which is, the journalism side, holding the powerful accountable, entertaining, informing, those kind of things as kind of a just core philosophy haven't changed. Now, the way we execute that has changed, and the vehicles that we use to distribute information. And so even though we might be at the same city commission meeting covering it in the same way or digging around trying to find out what's happening that folks may not want us to know is happening, then the way we disseminate that through video or even our own podcasts or the ability to dive into data in the electronic age is obviously a lot different. And so, different in some ways, the same in the others. The same with advertising. We've always tried to deliver customers to our advertisers so their business can grow. That used to be through a print product. Now we have these amazing digital marketing abilities, not just with our own audience, but with basically every digital tool there is. And so that's a different way of trying to grow somebody's business. In some ways, on the advertising side, it's easier, right? I talk when we meet with clients about what I call faith-based marketing, and that's a print ad or a billboard or a TV ad or a radio ad. You have some faith, right, that people see those ads and then something good happens, but it's very difficult to measure. On the digital side, it's much easier to measure, and you can actually start putting together an ROI equation that is really easy to measure. Hey, if you know what a customer's worth and you know how many leads you convert into a sale, and we can tell you how many leads we generated, we can actually put together a math problem that shows you how to grow a business. So it's changed, a lot.
There's obviously a lot that goes into publishing a newspaper. Based off what you just said, there's so many aspects to it. I'm kind of curious, what does your everyday look like? What do you do in the average day? Do you have your hand in the news? Is it more business? Tell us.
Yeah, so I'm the only person that gets to float across both sides, right? And so our journalists, generally speaking, don't know what our advertising department is doing, and vice versa. We have a wall there. We certainly want them to interact and be aware of who each other are, and there are certainly opportunities to work together so long as it doesn't infringe on our journalists' ability to do their jobs unfettered, right?
Sure.
And so I get to live in the only person that gets to live in both of those worlds. Which is not to say I get to influence editorial coverage to benefit advertising, but I certainly get to provide perspective to both sides about what is going on. And so if I'm, dealing with an advertising customer who is also in the news, it's helpful for that customer to have somebody to talk to say, hey, here's perspective that your reporter might not be aware of, and so I can provide that to the news side, which sometimes they're going to say, well, we already know that perspective and we think it's lame and not worth being in the story. Or other times, oh wow, that was really helpful and it helped us do something more accurately. And so and then there's also issues of production and circulation and things like that. I have less influence over that the way our company is structured than I used to. What the powers that be want me to focus on is the advertising and the journalism.
Mm-hmm. So is there anything about the news industry that you wish everyday citizens knew more about?
Sure. I wish they knew about the people that we have in our newsroom and how passionate they are about their craft and about the community. Look, we talk about the daily beast, right? We wish we could spend all of our time working on investigative stuff and project stuff, but the daily beast never gets fed. There's always a crime or a game or a human interest story or whatever. And I say that because we're never caught up, and we certainly don't have time and aren't smart enough to have secret meetings where we conspire against, political groups or other institutions. I mean, that has never happened. I've never been a part of a meeting where we said, hey, let's call a meeting to figure out how we can really get somebody, or that's just not what we do. And so to the extent that there's a belief that happens, and I've heard it from both the left and the right, I've heard it from institutions. In fact, just this week, somebody was comparing their institution to another that was in a similar field, saying, oh, well, if this had been such and such, you would have treated it differently. And I just kind of shake my head and say, even if we had time to do that, which we don't, and even if we wanted to do that, which we don't, we're not smart enough to do that, right? We're not smart enough to figure out how to manipulate events, and they come at you so fast that, I mean, it would take some sort of artificial intelligence to actually carry out these kind of silly plots that people have. So that's what I would want people to know is, hey, we're just trying to cover the news. And yeah, we all bring our individual biases. You know, I love Bojangles, and if there's a story that Bojangles is part of some elaborate, you know, plot to overthrow the government, I'm going to have to overcome that bias. Well, guess what? We have people in the newsroom that don't like Bojangles, and we're going to, you know, offset each other. And so those biases tend to, you know, unless everybody shares the same one, which never happens, right? It's not the case in the chamber that you can't get agreement on anything in any workplace, then that's not something that's going to be an issue. So that's the thing I wish people knew is we're just trying to cover the news, and we're not conspiring against anybody.
I just want to say I feel sorry for anyone who doesn't like Bojangles.
You got lucky with the proximity to your office
yeah.
of that Bojangles there.
Yeah, now we got a little competition setting up. We had a story about Chick-fil-A going in.
Yeah, I saw that.
2 chicken places within walking distance. My cardiologist is already sweating that one.
You know, Skip, that was great insight into the kind of world of the Democrat. In the last couple of years, I feel like, again, you know, it's fascinating, I'm sure, from your perspective, that we've had a lot of big news stories in Tallahassee the last few years, and some that are, you know, hopefully once in a blue moon type of occurrences, some that are, you know, some of the crime things that kind of unfortunately can seem to be recurring. But they're big news stories, and they have a lot of depth, and your team has done a really good job of really digging in and, you know, uncovering things, as well as just telling the story and the bigger narratives. What's it like, you know, in the newsroom when it's a big breaking news kind of day? What's I mean, I think a lot of people think of, you know, movies, Ben Bradley and Robert Redford and the gang and All the President's Men, that kind of stuff. I mean, what's it like? How would you describe a big news day?
I think it's about what you would think it is. It's hectic and intense, and there's a lot of adrenaline. I think there's an effort to try to make sure we're at the right speed, right? So it's kind of like running the 400 meters where you can't be on that full sprint or you'll flame out too soon, but you better get along or you'll be too far behind. And so you're kind of trying to find that right speed and you know, be responsible. I think we want to you know, here's the kind of dirty little secret of our business right now. Scoops are really not that important. We're in an aggregated news world, and so your scoop lasts for minutes, maybe even seconds. So we were first on Jimbo Fisher leaving. And that was about a 40-second scoop over Tomahawk Nation.
Wow.
And then seconds later, everyone was, you know, linking or, you know, repeating what had happened. And, you know, you might get credit for that, you might not. I'm not into all of that, you know, first reported by stuff. Once it's out, right? Where the scoops are on the deeper, bigger investigative pieces, right? That's where you really build your brand and where you're telling stories you can't get. So, you know, back to your question, there's a lot of adrenaline, and then there's really trying to find a balance between how fast can we get information out and at what speed do we have to operate to make sure we're not going too fast, which looks like wrong information or information without context or whatever. The tools we have make it a lot easier to do things, right? So when an indictment drops, we can be screen grabbing and tweeting and have different people reading different parts of it to give quick perspective on what's happening. But it's about what if you were scripting a kind of shooting a TV show, it probably looks like you would think it is. It's intense, right? It's most of these things don't happen at 2:30 in the afternoon, and so a lot of it is. I mean, the yoga shooting is a lot of texting at texting. Hey, I just talked to somebody, or I get on the phone, and there was somebody, I forget who it was, that I knew that was in the bar at Benton and who was giving me those kind of things. So it's about what you would think.
So I was on a news team at one point, and I certainly couldn't even relate my experience to your depth of experience at all. But one of the things that I noticed in my short time there was when you see the shootings and the bad things that happen every day, it can kind of wear down on your mind a little when you're so involved in all that. Through that kind of news culture, what do you do to kind of make sure you get the best talent and you're able to retain the talent who, is really good at what they do?
Well, the best weapon that we have when it comes to retaining talent, the best two weapons are William Hatfield and Jennifer Portman, who lead our newsroom and do it in a just amazing way. Mm-hmm. And so, I figured out a long time ago, but not soon enough, that I would much rather have a B+ talent who's an A+ person than a A+ talent who's a C person.
Sure.
We've been lucky to get A+ talent that are A+ people. We just got a bunch of great people, right? And so what we don't have is a lot of gossip and a lot of infighting, and William and Jennifer treat people with respect. We collaborate on when things get sticky, ethically or otherwise, and we stick together and we try to do the right thing. And so we haven't had a lot of turnover, and that's I'm sure a lot of that is luck, but I think some of it is the great work that William and Jennifer do to run that shop in a way that is really respectful of people. I think the danger, the burnout danger in our business right now is not the horror of what we cover. It's the animosity that we face on a daily basis, and it's just so misplaced, right? I mean,
Sure.
It just and it's not exclusive to the right. It probably prevails more there, given some of the rhetoric that comes from the president. But we hear it on the left as well. I mean, we're called Trump apologists and have been compared to Nazis, recently by folks on the left. It's inexcusable on either side, and because I just know it's not true. I know it's not true. And one doesn't get to argue with me on this because I'm just right, okay? I don't know what, on the issues of the day, capital punishment and all these things, I don't know if my view is right or not. If an angel came down and said, do you want to wager your salvation on being right on a political issue of the day, I would not do it because I have no confidence in that. But on this, I know for a fact that we're not practicing fake news, that we're not in bed with one side or the other. I know it, and so and so that's where I worry that people just say, "Hey, I'm tired of the hate and vitriol," and that would be a shame because ultimately the republic is at risk if journalism is not practiced in its most robust form.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a fabulous series of comments. Earlier you mentioned the brand of the newspaper, and I think it's relevant to those thoughts. How would you describe the brand of the Democrat and the journalism that happens there, or how would you How would you like people to perceive that brand?
Well, I would like people to perceive, from the journalism standpoint, our brand is that we don't play favorites, and that we're kind of equal opportunity accountability holders, right? And that we're not afraid to have fun, that we're not afraid to admit when we make mistakes, because we do. That we're not afraid to ask the tough questions. This is an interesting market. More than any market I've been in, Tallahassee tends to not want to have tough conversations, right? This is a town where people kind of have an image of what they want the town, the community to be, and aren't terribly interested in, generally speaking, talking about the parts of the town that the parts of the community that may not be shining. And so that's interesting when you're the newspaper, because when you have some of the difficulties with crime and corruption that we've had, we're going to keep surfacing that. I remember, prepare to squirm a little, I remember when the subpoenas first came out, that there was a lot of sensitivity within the chamber about how that story was going to be played, and that the chamber may not, come out smelling like a rose. I think that turned out to not be an issue, but there was, it seems like seems a little silly now. But when we first started writing about those subpoenas, there were people that said this was not a story, that this was a non-story, that there was not a corruption problem. You had elected officials saying we don't have a problem. Well, I don't think there's anybody saying now that there wasn't a problem. And the question is, how deep does it go? And we certainly don't know anything about that. So, from a brand standpoint, it's disheartening when you're getting shot at from kind of both sides of the political spectrum, which we are. It's also a little reassuring, right? It would make me nervous if the right thought we were doing a great job and the left didn't, or vice versa. And so the fact that we're getting it from both sides at least tells us we're somewhere in the middle of the road. There's people that don't believe that nonpartisan journalism can still exist, right? I am not one of those people. I still believe that we can play it down the middle and hold everyone accountable up and down the political spectrum, up and down the kind of powerful scale, and all of those things. So anyway, did that answer your question?
No, I thought it was brilliant.
Okay.
I think that's the kind of things that people just probably don't think about every day when they open up the newspaper or open it up on their phone or however they're reading their
well, and that's the other thing about the kind of bias discussion is most of what we do doesn't have anything to do with ideology, right? The new Chick-fil-A coming to town, a shooting at a barber shop, Mike Martin making his run to immortality, a new FAMU's new cornea research that was so amazing that we had recently. Those maybe most of what we do doesn't fall within the kind of left-right, lens that people tend to want to view everything through, which makes that whole thing kind of silly. Oh, well, I dropped the paper, they're too liberal or they're too conservative. Well, most front pages, that's just an irrelevant distinction, and so it's kind of silly.
Yeah. You were talking about the community maybe not wanting to dive into some difficult conversations. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think that part of that is understandable human nature kind of pride, right? So, when you say to someone, how are your children doing? The first answer is probably not, oh, well, my kid got caught with drugs or something. I mean, you're probably going to say, yeah, he's doing great. He's making good grades. And so, I get that. I think the crime issue has kind of forced the community's hand, right? So at some point, when you're X years in a row of worst in the state in certain areas, it's like, okay. But even then, and this really, I got a long fuse in my business, but it gets a little short when I hear people talking about crime hot spots, right? I think that's a way of trying to diminish the problem. And so we've got these hot spots that are, on the south side or whatever. Well, if we had a malaria outbreak and it was focused on hot spots, maybe on the north side of town, I don't think those folks would appreciate it if folks on the south side or elsewhere said, oh, well, there's just we don't have a malaria problem. It's just in some, hot spots in Killarn or Ox Bottom. Give me a break. You're either a member of the community or you're not. And if you live, way out west or east or, Southwood or the north side, and you don't think we have a crime problem because it doesn't happen to be right in your backyard, I think that's really sad, and it's indicative of this overall issue, which is a hypothesis of mine. Again, wouldn't wager my salvation on it, but I think that folks tend to kind of have their head in the sand a little bit on these things, and it's because I think they want to protect this, image that they have, and I'm not sure that's the best way to go.
Skip, that's fascinating perspective. Again, another item that I think is an ongoing discussion. Certainly is a discussion that we are monitoring here at the Chamber of Commerce. We try to be advocates for the business community. We try to be advocates for a growing, thriving, successful community. And Tallahassee's at a I don't know, an inflection point perhaps, where a lot of change has happened in this community over the last decade or so and continues to happen. It's a city that maybe is still in the final stages of migrating from being a small town to a sizable, mid-sized city that has mid-sized city problems and questions and conversations. But one of those things is, we see flare up a lot, and it happens on the pages of the Democrat, as well as the comments sections when stories are posted on Facebook, is stories about growth. You mentioned earlier things like a new Chick-fil-A coming to town, which excites a lot of people. But when you see stories about a particular development or trees being cut down for a new project, that continues to be something that sparks a lot of sometimes animosity between folks in the community. What are your thoughts on that whole just realm of what's happening here in Tallahassee?
Well, so growth is obviously a sensitive subject here on kind of both sides. It's definitely a unique market. So I've spent time in, really, this is the fourth market I've spent a lot of time in my life. Lakeland, where I grew up, this area outside of Charlotte, Fort Walton Beach, and here. And growth is certainly a much dirtier word in Tallahassee than, by far than any of those places that I've been, which is illustrated by the fact that there hasn't been much, right? Our population growth is very low. What is called growth here, a new Chick-fil-A is not growth, right? If your population's not growing, then building a new Chick-fil-A just means that people that used to go somewhere else are going to go to Chick-fil-A, but they're not going to go anywhere else, right? So another restaurant will close. Industry-wise, we haven't had a lot of growth here. And again, people don't like to talk about that, but we've had Danfoss, and then we had, Danfoss, right? And then there was Danfoss before, that's it. That's what we've got to hang our hat on. I think, and we've editorialized on this very strongly, that if you're not growing, you're dying. And I think that the fact that Tallahassee is a large, small town with more metro problems, crime and poverty, is not surprising because there hasn't been the growth that provides the types of jobs that can really grow an economy, right? So we've got this kind of strange situation where we've got super low unemployment, but a poverty rate that's still high. That should tell you something, right? It tells you that the jobs aren't the kind of jobs that really grow a community. And so, that doesn't mean, that we need to be clear-cutting million-year-old groves of live oaks. But if your kind of policy, personal philosophy is there should never be a tree cut down in this market for any reason, then I would say that that's probably not a position that's going to be particularly relevant to a discussion of how Tallahassee evolves. And so, I think what we call growth around here is a lot of government infrastructure and a lot of service economy construction, but building new nursing homes and Chick-fil-A's and student housing, that's not really growing the economy the way that this market needs to grow to, I think, solve some of these key poverty crime type problems that we have.
This is Sarah Solomon cutting in. I'm going to go ahead and pause this conversation here, but that's not all, and we hope you will come back again next week to join us for the rest of this conversation with the publisher of the Tallahassee Democrat, Skip Foster. Next week, we will dive a little bit deeper into some of Skip's hobbies outside of the newspaper. One of those is weather forecasting, which he has become quite well known for in Tallahassee, especially with hurricane season beginning again. In the meantime, feel free to follow us on any of our social media pages or catch us on the website talchamber.com. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.